God has different ways of dealing with different people. Aren't you glad that God has a different way to deal with everyone? If He dealt with all of us the same way, it would be very predictable and it might be very boring. But God deals with all of us according to our temperaments. So for a moment, let's think about our temperaments here. The more hardened we are, the more stubborn that we are, the more resolute that we are, the more God will have to break us. Look at the contrast. Two different ways that God deals with people. Just take, for example, again, Moses. For Moses, what God did was, before He met with Moses, He did all the breaking. Right? Because God had him flee Egypt, was in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses, who thought he was a deliverer, for 40 years, God dealt with him, and then He came and said, I'm a nobody. Then God says, now I'm ready to meet with you, Moses. By the time Moses has the encounter with God at the burning bush, he's a broken man. And it was in the brokenness that God could speak to him and then build him up again. But with Jacob, it was not so. When God met with Jacob by the river Jabbok, there was too much of Jacob in him. So what did God have to do? He had to wrestle him. He had to bring Jacob to the breaking points where Jacob had no more strength left in him. It was at the end of Jacob's strength where God could begin His work of establishing His promise. And a lot of times this happens in our life. God allows us to exhaust our strength so that in the exhaustion of our strength, God can begin His work in our lives. And if you ever talk to lifeguards who rescue people for a living from the water, they'll tell you one most important thing that they will follow in the rescue of people who are drowning is wait for them to give up struggling. It almost sounds cruel because the lifeguard knows if they try to rescue someone too soon, he would get punched in the face. Because the person is flailing everywhere. They're trying to rescue themselves. And the longer they try to rescue themselves and they don't know how to swim, they cannot rescue themselves. They need someone to rescue them. And the lifeguard knows it is at the end of their strength is when His work begins. And God knows this about us. He says, the moment you stop prevailing is when I will establish my promise. So word to the wise here this morning. Stop fighting. Stop being stubborn with Him. Because the longer you're stubborn, the more God has to work in breaking us. And it's only when He breaks us down that He can build us to who He has called us to be. And that's what happened with Jacob. A lifetime of cheating, supplanting, deceiving had to be reversed in that encounter that God had with him. He had cheated his brother, cheated his father, cheated everyone around him all his life. And here he was making deals with God. God says, before I can make you the man I've called you to be, Jacob, I need you to come to the end of your strength. And it's at the end of your strength that I will begin to establish my promise, which is I'm calling you Israel from today. You're going to be my chosen one. You're going to be my one through whom I'm going to establish my promise. And I'm telling you, that incredible encounter that Jacob had with God in that time of prayer, it was in his breaking that God met with him. I'm telling you, my friend, if you find yourself today broken, if you find yourself today in a place of heartbreak, you're in a good place. God is working in your life. God is establishing His purposes. God will fulfill His promises concerning your life. Don't be discouraged. Don't give up hope. God does not leave things half done. If God has begun a good work in you, He will surely complete what He has started. God does not leave anything unfinished. God always finishes what he begins. And that means every single person who has yielded themselves to God will find God establishing his promises and his work in their life. Can I hear an amen?